I've written off the winter. I'm expecting to lose money all the way through till probably next March, and that's really going to be that's really what we've got to expect on our plates. And it's a balance, because we have to keep look after our staff and make sure they're okay, and at the same time make sure that we're financially strong enough to take advantage of things the other side.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The sharp rises of COVID cases in the UK forced the hand of the government into a second lockdown. It comes at a time that Melbourne has begun opening up its restaurants and society. Just a few months ago, the UK and Victoria recorded similar daily numbers, but they've both gone in different paths. What impact is it having on the UK's restaurant sector? Mitch Tonks is one of the world's most influential seafood chefs and owner of the Seahorse restaurant and Rockfish restaurants. Mitch, how are you going?
Hey, really nice to talk to you, Huck. We're okay. We're doing okay.
What's the landscape like there at the moment, being sent into a second lockdown? How are you feeling?
Well, it feels very different from the first lockdown. I mean, the first lockdown was in the summer here, and there was a lot of people still moving around. We had really good weather, and of course, every single thing was shut. And now what we've got is schools open, universities open, some like takeaway going on somewhere. So it doesn't really feel like the first lockdown, and actually the second one, I think most people are finding pretty miserable.
What sort of impact is this having, do you think, on the restaurant sector? You have multiple restaurants, but what's the sense in the hospitality sector at the moment?
I think it's carnage all over, and I think like anything, there are sort of some people are faring better than others, but I think in general, the first lockdown was like nothing we've ever seen before, and no entrepreneur or restaurateur has ever had to deal with a business challenge which was zero income. We've had pretty good support from the government in a lot of ways. We have a scheme over here where the government are paying 80% of people's wages. Businesses have to top up if they want to give people more. There is landlords in some areas have been appalling, in some areas have been working with business. There's been some pretty good funding sort of options from banks as well, but the problem is all that stuff's got to be paid back at some point. So we're in for a long haul. But I think that from our perspective, our restaurants are all on the coast, and we had an amazing summer because nobody could go away, nobody could fly. Everybody came to the coast. Everybody in the southwest had an absolute bumper 2 to 3 months, like the best year we've ever had, and which was really odd. While everybody else in cities were just struggling and struggling and struggling, and now we're going into the winter here, which was always my fear. I thought we would go into the winter without a summer behind us, which would have been pretty catastrophic. But we've had a good trading period, and now we're into the winter, and it's deathly. I mean, there really is. I mean, obviously all restaurants are closed, but we two takeaways we open, and we keep our retail fish market open. But even that's proving to be a real challenge.
You are heading into winter, and the cases have been rising. What's your feeling at the moment? With the numbers are staggering compared to what we've experienced in Australia. How are you feeling about the pandemic and what's ahead?
I think everyone's really worried. I mean, the winter time is where we traditionally in England we see people with colds and flu. That's just what happens at this time of year, and it spreads as everyone goes back inside. But I think now there's a vaccine on the horizon. There's people are a little more buoyant about what things will be next year. But I think generally everybody in the industry, and certainly in the kind of holiday regions where we are, I've written off the winter. I'm expecting to lose money all the way through till probably next March, and that's really going to be that's really what we've got to expect on our plates, and it's a balance, because we have to keep look after our staff and make sure they're okay, and at the same time make sure that we're financially strong enough to take advantage of things the other side, which we will be.
What sort of position are you in at the moment? You're just sort of talking about March, which is still a long way away in regards to the viability of the restaurants. I mean, you can have as deep pockets as you want, but the reality of restaurants is really slim margins. What's what's the landscape looking like for realistically for restaurants?
I think it's pretty grim. I mean, if we talk about ourselves, we'll get through, and we'll trade again. And I'm not particularly worried about whether we'll exist or not. Our restaurants will continue and get through. But I worry about I worry about the sort of changing landscape of the industry. I mean, uh, we are an amazing industry, and the restaurant industry in the UK is just full of some incredible entrepreneurs and people that have built bars and restaurants out of almost nothing. And I guess what we're going to do is go through this kind of churn, and those people will all reinvent ourselves and do things again. I mean, some of the stuff that's come out of this has been phenomenal. So some restaurants started doing home delivery. Here's a box of food from the restaurant, and I've had a few sent to me from restaurant mates to give them feedback, and we've bought a couple. But I'll tell you what, some of the stuff that you can buy and eat at home is just truly and utterly fantastic. So, mates of mine that run Hawksmoor, Will Beckett, he's our chairman. They launched Hawksmoor at home, so you can curate a wonderful evening and some cocktails at your house, and their sales are off the scale with it. So, so I think restaurateurs in their natural entrepreneurial state will reinvent themselves and get through. So, but there will be some loss. I think pubs are going to suffer here more than anything. I think pubs are, everyone seems to have it in, the government seems to have it in for pubs, in that that's where it's spread, and the curbing the sale of alcohol and all those kind of things. So I do feel for pub groups incredibly so, and indeed my local. It's part of our community here having a pub.
You've been a very influential restaurateur and chef for a long time in the UK. Why seafood? Your focus is very much on seafood. What drew you to that?
Well, I grew up in a little place called Weston-super-Mare, which is on the north coast, in Somerset, in the southwest peninsula. And as a kid, I mean, we were just sort of left to run and go and do our own things. We used to play on the beach, and I guess the beach became my playground. And I used to fish a lot, water ski, wakeboard, and there was just a kind of real love. I used to go, on fishing boats, catching conger eels and all that kind of stuff. And then I used to spend a lot of time in the kitchen with my grandmother, who was just the most fabulous cook. And I'd be sent down to fishmongers with her to go and pick up crabs and brown shrimps and all sorts of things. And I just sit there preparing them with her. It was just normal. She wasn't the most amazing cook in the world, but I guess in those days people did cook. So it's kind of what I remember. And then I had a bit of a wandering career, getting into building and all sorts of things. And at sort of 27, decided I wanted to open my own fish shop, because I was just, I'd realised that I was so enthusiastic about seafood and nobody was selling it in the UK. And that's when it started. And then I, had fish left over in the evenings, and I used to think, why can't I just open a little restaurant upstairs and cook it? And it was quite interesting because, at that time, this is back in '98. Most of the kind of fish restaurants in the UK were very classically run by very classically trained chefs, lots of cream involved, with all the cooking. And I was kind of watching what you guys were doing over there, and seeing the kind of Asian influence of things, and also reading cookbooks and things, and old Jane Grigson books, and that they were just grilling fish. They were doing things incredibly simply, and so that's what I started doing, and that's where I really discovered, wow, I love this, and I also love this wonderful nakedness about great seafood. And since then, I've just travelled the world eating and cooking seafood, really, which has been wonderful.
Well, it's one of the hardest things to do, and like simplicity in food is one of the most beautiful, but it is actually hard to get right. But where it really works is seafood. You're surrounded by water, and it's such a small island there. In Australia, we've got amazing seafood, but Perth is 5 hours flight from Sydney away. It's a huge country, and um, but what's it like getting access to seafood in the UK?
I mean, it's brilliant, and I harp on that we've got some of the best seafood in the world here. And I live in a small fishing town called Brixham, um, which is on the south coast. And I look out my office window and I look straight at the fishing fleet. And it's the biggest port in England. We land 40 million pounds worth of fish here, but it's all stuff like turbot, Dover sole, cuttlefish. Most of it, 95% of it, all going abroad. And interestingly, I got Sus over here, some years ago, and he bought pugs and a few of the kind of fishermen from Australia, and we had a little fishing competition, and it was great. We had a whole load of fish sent over from Australia, King George whiting, and all sorts of wonderful things. And we did a little cook-off in my kitchen, of Aussie fish and UK fish, and it was fascinating. It was really great. It was really great, and you can imagine the competitiveness going on between which one tasted better. But you guys have got those lovely big bluefish, and those kind of lovely big snappers, and all that kind of stuff, which I think is unique too.
That's an amazing room to be in with Andrew Puglisi from Kinkawuka Mussels and John Sussman, the fish fiend of Australia. What fish won out that day?
Oh man, they were raving about Dover sole, and my pal Matt, who founded the Seahorse with me, he's a classically trained chef and he cooks the best Dover sole meunier on the planet, and the boys were just absolutely raving about it. But it was really great because there was, I can't remember everyone's names now. Ferguson from Kangaroo Island, Steve Moriarty, the tuna fisherman. I mean, there was a whole sort of 15 of the guys, and we just had this amazing time. It was really awesome.
What's it been like having that career change, being 27 and moving into that sort of food area? Has it been a challenge being a fishmonger and then restaurateur?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant learning curve. You're always on the balls of your feet trying to work stuff out. And over the years, I've got a whole load of stuff wrong. But I managed to kind of grow that first restaurant group into 13. We had 10 in London. We floated on the stock market back in 2005. And so it was a big old journey. And it was wonderful. Made a lot of mistakes on the way, but it was just pure enthusiasm for wanting to share a love of seafood with people and cooking that sort of made it work. And I did a lot of TV and stuff during the period, and I always had this, I guess, this imposter syndrome, of like not really being a trained chef, but kind of being out there and doing it. And in the end, I think I think once you find what it is you love doing in life, it just becomes, I don't know, work. I don't know when I work and when I rest. It all feels like it's just one life really, which is really wonderful.
That simplicity that just stars when you use seafood. How do you do that? How do you approach cooking seafood? Is there a fish that you just love to cook, and can you take us through the best way you would cook it?
So I think the interesting thing about the experience that you get over the years of working with seafood, there's not many fish that I haven't prepared, eaten, or cooked, and each one of them has individual qualities that just need different treatment. So, for example, squid, just cooking squid over an open fire can be truly wonderful. But when the squid gets slightly larger, and you can't really, you end up toasting the outside, and the inside doesn't really get that properly lovely grilled texture. So you kind of need small squid to do that, and then the larger squid are very good for braising. And then you take fish like red mullet, which when they get big, I think they need to be filleted because you get a wonderful different texture of the flake. But when they're small, they're great for just shallow frying. And I would say probably a red mullet, 4 to 6 ounce in size, is probably my favourite fish to eat in the world. And the reason being is that they just have this incredible saffron taste that you get from the skin, and they need to be treated really delicately. So it's the only fish really that I put flour on, and I just literally dust it in light flour, a little olive oil, a little rosemary tucked into the belly, and then just gently fry it in olive oil till you get this wonderful sort of golden caramelization on the outside, keeping the skin intact, and then just serve that with some sea salt and some lemon. Um, and I think it's one of the most delightful um, pieces of fish in the world. The same as turbot, So turbot, a small 1 kilo turbot cooked over a fire in a cage that's maybe 500 mil above the flames, basting it with a mixture of sort of olive oil and vinegar. You do get a wonderful experience as the fish poaches almost inside its skin, and the white skin really does become something magnificent. But then you take a chunk of, a 4 to 5 kilo fish and you roast it in a conventional oven. And what you get is the kind of membranes between the flakes just melting. And you get this wonderful, gorgeous stickiness that you don't get on small fish. So I think it's a kind of, that education in seafoods has been a joy for me. And I think that that's what the great fish cooks of the world, if every time I've met, sat down and had coffee with Tetsuya when I was in Sydney. He just lives and breathes seafood and talks about it in such an intelligent way that this is no wonder that when you eat the food that he prepares, it's so delicious. And likewise, I've been to some pretty big name chef restaurants and had fish dishes and think you haven't got a clue what you've got your hands on. You've cooked it and you've prepared it. And it looks amazing on the plate, but it's not. You haven't brought out the best in this piece of fish. So I think that just comes from working with one thing, I think.
At the top of the show, you talked about how amazing the British culinary scene is, and um, can you take us through, what British cuisine is? There's but in the day there was a bit of ridicule about whether the British could cook, but the food scene there is actually incredibly extraordinary and one of the leaders in the world. Can you tell us a bit about how you see the British hospitality landscape?
Well, I think we are definitely a nation of. I mean, I didn't realize until the pandemic just how many people were employed in hospitality, but we're a hugely social nation. And I think, if you think about British food per se, it's grey food. It's we 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we were eating, pies and mince and all those kind of things, which are equally delicious. And there are some chefs that have carried on interpreting that. But the landscape is just diverse. I mean, I think London certainly is one of the best, most exciting places to eat on the planet. You can walk around Chinatown and find any number of dumpling places, dim sum places, things that have kind of all sprung up. And usually it starts with, I mean, there's an Indian restaurant called Cricket, and I don't know the people that run it at all. I just know it's two lads read their story that travelled India, loved it, and came back and opened this restaurant with their own. I don't think either of them were chefs either. They just came back and did their own kind of take on Indian food. And I remember sitting in there just eating it, and everything was just so incredibly sort of sweet, hot, fragrant. That kind of wonderful flavour explosion in the mouth. And it was really wonderful. And there are any number of restaurants like that. And you've got big steak restaurants like Hawksmoor, who really sort of, I don't know, created that. Like walking into one of their restaurants, it feels like it's been there forever, and you feel like you're walking into some part of London's history. And then you sit down, drink great cocktails. There's bars underground, and also I think that what we've got is we're a very ambitious nation. So you get young chefs just go out and do stuff. They'll do. You find people doing like pop-ups and then going off into their own kind of permanent restaurants. And we just got some amazing talent here. I mean, we really have. It's phenomenal.
You've got a lot of venues, and it's quite a big company that you have and you're very influential in the hospitality sector. What's it been like as a business owner during this period with all sorts of political turmoil in regards to Brexit and then the pandemic? Has it had an impact on what you do?
I mean, it most certainly has. But in my case, I think it's been a positive impact on the way we thought about our business. I think the one thing that's been really amazing through all of this is the camaraderie in our industry is phenomenal. The amount of contact I had during the first lockdown from fellow restaurateurs was actually quite moving, and conversations that we had, information we shared, all in the sort of name of let's work together and get through this. But I've got this really great restaurant director, a guy called Dave Strauss, who used to run a couple of restaurants over here, Burger and Lobster and Goodman Seafood. He's been with us a couple of years, and Dave's always been kind of like prodding me about everything that's wrong with restaurants, to the point that I just think, oh, Dave, why are you in restaurants? Because all you do is keep telling me what's wrong with them. And he had incredible foresight, in a sense of, look, you know, we have all these people on the floor. We work them to death in the summer. Basically all the stuff that we know about working in a restaurant that's tough for people as to why people don't continue in the industry. And during the first lockdown and leading up to it, I really kind of took Dave's advice and lead, and we reviewed every single part of our business. Why do we have to have 28 wines? Why have we got 14 beers? Why have we got all these things? They take time to stack. They take time to carry upstairs. Customers really don't need all that choice. And why are we open so many hours in the winter? Why don't we open less? And why don't we put less people on the floor and take some tables out so the kitchen's just not bashed, to death the whole time? We're just trying to cram covers in. Anyway, and why is the menu so big? Why can't the menu be smaller? Why can't we, we've done some things like printing it on tablecloths, on paper tablecloths, which we always did at Rockfish anyway. When you go to a Rockfish restaurant, we have all the local fish on the paper tablecloth, and the way to circles what we have today. And then of course we have the menu. So we shortened the menu and put it onto the tablecloth, and the result has been less staff, happier staff, less customers, more average spend, and more profit. And it's kind of like all of the things that we were doing would be things that if you'd have tried to do them pre-pandemic, it would have been like trying to stop a moving train. You had never been able to change the things that we did, and and so those changes have been really positive, and really our restaurant model has been bust for a long time. We're so keen to, well, that's why we're in it. We just love looking after people, like to the nth degree. And I remember a night just before lockdown. I've got my daughter and son working at the Seahorse, and my daughter's boyfriend was working at the time as well. And I worked that particular evening. I left the restaurant at 11 o'clock. It was a magical evening. The bar was full, the restaurant was full, and I came home. My daughter got back home at 2:30. Uh, and then my son called me at 3 and said, "Daddy, you still awake?" I went, "Yeah." He said, "Can I come round?" So he came round. And I'm sat there with my kids at 3:30 in the morning thinking the human cost of running a restaurant is just not worth it. We're all just sat here, wired after this service. And I don't think customers really appreciate that goes into it. And so we decided to change the restaurant model at the Seahorse too by opening all day, shortening the hours, shortening the menu, and again, the result is a much happier bunch of people. It's and I think that's what's been great to come out of this pandemic for us.
How have you felt personally during this time? Do you see the industry differently and your own life?
I don't see the industry differently. I mean, I think cut me in half, and I've got restaurants written in the middle of me. I just adore being in my own restaurants, everybody else's restaurants, and I walk into that fish market, most days, and it's incredibly exciting for me. So I still feel as passionate and loving about the industry as I ever have done. But in my own personal life, I had the joy of, spending it mostly with all my children who are now grown up, and we walked a lot. We were in the summer when we were allowed to. We sailed. My daughter taught me to do yoga, and I built some structure to my life, which I never used to have. It used to be up in the morning, have a brandy, and then you go to the fish market and go to see everybody. And now what I've done is built a structure of my life where I get up and I work because I'm best in the mornings. I take a run or exercise at 4, maybe a light lunch in the middle, and I try and finish my day at around 5 or 6 in the evening, unless I'm going into one of the restaurants. And I've never done that before. I used to just be, my wife would say, "You're never home," and I would say, "No, I am." And the truth was, I wasn't. I was always in the restaurants. And which is no, I think you've got to do that to build them. But I'm perhaps a little more balanced. That's what's come out of lockdown for me.
The chance to travel abroad again has really been stifled this year, and many borders are shut, and the airline industry is in turmoil. And yet, people in food, or people who love food, travel for food. We go to all different countries for different experiences. How are you feeling about the future of that and the experiences that you've had in the past, and potentially what that may mean in the next couple of years?
Well, I think in some ways we're forced to examine our own on what's on our own doorsteps, which is no bad thing. I mean, there are, I talked about London earlier and the restaurant scene there. There's a lot of chefs that are quitting cities and already have done that are opening up on the coast in the UK. And there's any number of really fabulous places that I would normally just jump on a plane to Mallorca or Menorca or somewhere and go away for a week and enjoy the sun and food there. I'm going to spend some time, getting around some of the places in the northeast that I haven't been, and Manchester and places, and just enjoy some great British restaurants I would normally um, shy away from, and also the interest in our coastline over here now is become really brilliant. Before I think the British coastline was, it's been going through change for the last 10 or 15 years, and now people have realised that actually it's very very beautiful and brilliant. So they'll stay here. For me, going away, I mean, I used to travel probably once or twice a month to somewhere in Europe to eat and meet people. I shall miss it, but if it didn't happen for a couple of years, um, then it would be fine. And I think in some ways, one lesson that we have to take out of this is that a 20 quid flight to Europe doesn't do the planet any good. Um, we need to kind of do less of that stuff. And we plan our big holiday a year where if I'm going to Australia, I'm going for 6 weeks, and that's my holiday. And I'm not going to go to Australia and this and that and this and that and this and that. I mean, we just have to do less of it, I think, which will be great for our local economies, right? I mean, if everyone doesn't go away, our seaside towns and our local economy will be great. And the other thing I really worry about is I go to Madrid, and any of those sort of in Galicia and all those places, because I love the small little bars in Venice. Well, I love to be crammed in. And God, what I wouldn't give to be in Venice now, just eating some seafood and drinking in a bar. But to get to a bar where there's screens and I can't be crammed in and people are wearing masks, I kind of wonder whether it'll all come back to how it really was, because that's what I went for. And I won't go unless I can do that. I want that culture. That's why I go to those places. You know.
What's it looking like at the moment? Are you starting to get on top of the virus there? Is there hope that everything will open up again soon? How are you feeling about that?
Feeling pretty negative, I think, about the next 3 months. I think we're in lockdown here until the 2nd of December, and the government are saying that on the second we are definitely coming out of it. But what they're going to do is to reintroduce different tiers depending on the R rate in different areas, and some of those rules have been very hard to interpret and understand, especially how they've been applied to hospitality. So I'm expecting that what they'll do is there'll be harsher rules around things, and I think hospitality will be the industry that suffers. And the sadness is, like in every sector, there is good hospitality and there is less good hospitality. But I would say that of all the restaurants I know, they are probably the safest places to go and eat. I mean, what we go through at work is just utterly phenomenal in keeping our restaurants COVID secure. And extra people on cleaning. We have hosts on the doors. I mean, phenomenal levels of stuff. So restaurants are safe, and that's the frustration about it.
Well, there's some nervous times ahead because you do have a lot of cases and you're heading into winter, but is there some positives to come out of this experience for you and the industry?
Definitely. I mean, like anything, there'll be a culling of businesses that we're never, really doing that well anyway. And I think there's a strengthening in the industry of that sort of people are starting to have to think again, that raw thought, and kind of adapt and make things happen. Like my own personal journey through lockdown has been, as I said earlier, one of only positivity. And we're in second lockdown here, and I'm looking out the window, and it's just not sunny, but I'm enjoying the time. I'm taking the time to write the Rockfish cookbook and do some other stuff, and I am hugely positive about the future. I'm probably feeling a little bit more frustrated that I just want to get my restaurants open again because I love them. And when you're in your house, I'm enjoying cooking with Pen, my wife, and my son coming around in the evening is also a chef, and we drink a bottle of wine and cook together, which is wonderful. But I think all of us just can't wait to get back together and get in the restaurants.
There'll come a time when we're beyond the pandemic and beyond COVID, and society opens up again. What's your hope for the industry at that time?
Well, I hope we stayed intact, and I hope that we're not all so debt ridden that we're going to be working for the next 10 years just to sort of get back to where we were before the pandemic. But my hope is that everybody will get back on their feet, and also that people will really appreciate the hospitality industry even more, because, as I said earlier, we're a social nation, and pubs and restaurants form a huge part of who we are and what we do. That's how our communities get together. And as you say, we're a small island, and we like to be out socializing together. So I hope it'll just really bounce back, and people will value them more.
Well, from a selfish point of view, I'm glad to hear that you're having the time to write the Rockfish book. I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. Mitch, we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds. Incredible stuff over there, and you're a bloody inspiration, mate. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Huck, that's great. It's been really, really nice to chat to you, and stay in touch, and good luck to everyone who's deep in the weeds at this particular moment, trying to work it all out. But stay positive, because we'll all be out of it at some point.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.